Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. Before the mounds, the world that gave rise to Mississippian life. You are standing in North America around the year 900 CE. There are no roads in the modern sense, no metal tools, no written alphabets carved into stone. But the land is far from empty, and history is already thick beneath your feet. The rivers dominate everything you see. The Mississippi, the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Arkansas, slow, brown, endlessly patient. They flood and retreat with a rhythm older than memory. Along their banks, forests open into rich bottomlands where soil renews itself year after year. This is not wilderness in the way you might imagine it. It is a lived-in landscape, shaped quietly by generations of human attention. People have been here for thousands of years already. Long before the Mississippian culture emerges, earlier societies learned how to read the land. When the rivers would rise, which plants returned after burning, where animals migrated seasonally. You are entering a world where survival depends not on conquest or spectacle, but on observation and repetition. Daily life for most people is slow and physical. You wake with the sun. Your home is a structure of wooden posts, woven walls, and clay plaster, rebuilt every decade or two as materials rot and settle. Smoke clings to everything: your clothes, your hair, your tools, because fire is always nearby. It cooks your food, hardens your pottery, keeps insects away, and anchors your evenings with warmth and light. Food is not taken for granted. Before large-scale agriculture, people depend on what archaeologists later call the Eastern Agricultural Complex. This means tending small gardens of native plants: goosefoot, sumpweed, sunflowers, little barley. These crops are reliable but limited. They supplement hunting deer and small game, fishing the rivers, and gathering nuts and berries. It is enough to survive, but not enough to grow large populations. What matters most in this world is balance. Overhunting can empty a forest. Poor planting can mean hunger. Communities are small, mobile, and cautious. Leadership exists, but it is personal and temporary, based on skill, age, or trust, not inherited power. And then quietly something changes. Corn arrives. It does not appear suddenly, and it is not immediately dominant. Maize has traveled slowly north from Mesoamerica, changing along the way. Early versions are not the fat yellow ears you know, but smaller, harder kernels that require careful processing. But maize has one overwhelming advantage. It produces far more calories per acre than native plants. At first, people experiment. They plant corn alongside older crops. They learn when to sow it, how to store it, how to grind it into meal. They discover that with corn, they can feed more children, support elders longer, and stay in one place for extended periods. Sedentary life begins to take hold. When you stay in one place year after year, the land changes with you. Fields are cleared, paths become worn, storage pits are dug deeper, houses cluster closer together, and with permanence comes memory. This is where your parents lived, where your grandparents are buried, where rituals begin to accumulate meaning. Population increases, slowly but unmistakably. More people require coordination. Someone must decide when fields are planted, how surplus is stored, how disputes are resolved. Social roles become more defined. Some people specialize as tool makers, ritual leaders, builders. Others farm full-time. This is the soil in which Mississippian culture will grow, but it is not yet fully formed. For now, communities are still relatively modest, connected by kinship and trade rather than centralized authority. You can already see early signs of something new in the way people organize space. Villages are no longer scattered randomly. They are arranged deliberately, often around open plazas. Communal spaces emerge where people gather for ceremonies, exchanges, or seasonal events. These places matter, even if they are not yet monumental. Burial practices begin to shift too. Some individuals are treated differently in death, placed in specific locations, buried with carefully chosen objects. This suggests that status is becoming more formalized, remembered beyond a single lifetime. None of this feels dramatic while it is happening. Change rarely does. From one generation to the next, life looks mostly the same. You plant, you harvest, you repair your house, you raise children who will do the same. But over centuries, small adjustments accumulate into something profound. The rivers continue their cycles, but now more people depend on their predictability. Floods are blessings and threats. Too little water means crop failure. Too much destroys fields. Communities begin to track seasonal patterns more closely, embedding them into ritual calendars and shared stories. Belief systems evolve alongside survival strategies. The world is understood as layered, an upper realm of sky and birds, a middle world of humans and animals, and a lower watery realm beneath the earth. Maintaining harmony between these layers becomes essential. Ritual is not separate from daily life, it is a practical response to uncertainty. You might expect such a society to leave behind grand monuments immediately, but that comes later. For now, power expresses itself subtly. Who speaks first in meetings, who controls stored grain, whose lineage is remembered most clearly. Leadership is still fragile, dependent on continued success. Trade networks expand quietly. Obsidian, copper, shells, and stone move along rivers and footpaths. These materials are not just decorative, they signal connection. Owning something from far away means you are part of a wider world, one that extends beyond the horizon of your daily walk. As maize agriculture intensifies, villages grow into towns. Towns begin to influence surrounding settlements. Some places become hubs not because of military force, but because they sit at crossroads of rivers, resources, and ritual importance. You are now standing on the edge of transformation. The conditions are set. Stable food supplies, growing populations, emerging hierarchies, shared beliefs, and landscapes that reward long-term planning. Nothing about this guarantees what will come next. Many societies reach this point and stall, fragment, or collapse. But in the river valleys of North America, something unprecedented is about to take shape. Soon, earth will be moved not just for houses or storage pits, but for symbolism. Labor will be organized on a scale unseen before. Leaders will claim authority not only over people, but over time, space, and the cosmos itself. The question is not whether change will come, it already has, but how far it will go, and who will guide it. So as you stand here, watching smoke drift above clustered homes and cornfields ripple in the humid air, you might wonder, what happens when a society built on balance and restraint begins to imagine something larger than survival? If you remain here for another few generations, you begin to notice that life is no longer organized only around families or seasons. Something slower, heavier, and more deliberate has settled over these river towns. The decisions people make now are not just about getting through the winter, but about shaping a future they expect to exist. With maize firmly established as the staple crop, food surplus becomes predictable. Predictability changes behavior. When hunger is no longer the constant background fear, time opens up. People spend more hours not producing food, directly repairing tools, teaching skills, performing rituals, planning gatherings. Children are weaned earlier because grain porridge is reliable. Population growth accelerates quietly, year after year. Villages expand outward, but they also deepen inward. Houses are rebuilt in the same locations, sometimes over the remains of older structures. The ground beneath your feet becomes layered with memory ash, broken pottery, compacted floors, discarded tools. Archaeologists will later call this a cultural midden, but to the people living here, it is simply home accumulating weight. Leadership becomes more visible now. In earlier times, authority was situational. A skilled hunter led the hunt. A respected elder mediated disputes. A healer oversaw rituals. Now, some individuals begin to hold influence across multiple domains. They oversee planting schedules, redistribute stored food during lean times, and preside over ceremonies that mark seasonal transitions. This authority is still fragile. Leaders cannot rule by force alone. There are no standing armies, no prisons, no written laws. Power depends on persuasion, generosity, and success. A leader who mismanages surplus or enjares the spirits risks losing everything. And so leadership becomes ritualized. Public ceremonies grow more frequent and more structured. You gather in open spaces cleared deliberately for communal use. These plazas are kept free of debris. They are swept, leveled, respected. People arrive with offerings, food, crafted objects, labor. The act of gathering itself reinforces hierarchy. Some people stand at the center, others watch from the edges. Ritual objects take on standardized forms. Certain shell designs, stone tools, or clay figurines appear again and again across distant settlements. These shared symbols help bind communities together. Even if you have never traveled far, you recognize these items. They mean something agreed upon, even if that meaning is never written down. The landscape itself begins to reflect social order. Trees are cleared not just for fields, but for visibility. Sightlines matter. You want to see the plaza from a distance. You want visitors approaching by river to understand immediately that this place is organized, claimed, intentional. Pathways become formalized. What was once a casual trail is now a recognized route, maintained and remembered. Storage becomes centralized. Instead of each household managing its own reserves, some grain is collected and stored communally. This is a turning point. Whoever controls storage controls survival during bad years. Redistribution during droughts or floods reinforces loyalty and obligation. But it also creates dependency. Not everyone benefits equally from these changes. Some families gain prestige through proximity to leaders or ritual roles. Others remain farmers whose labor supports the whole but whose names will never be remembered. Social differences deepen slowly, often unnoticed by those living through them. Health patterns shift as well. Diets heavy in maize provide calories but lack certain nutrients. Teeth wear down from stone-ground meal. Skeletons show signs of stress, anemia, joint strain, periodic malnutrition. Life expectancy does not necessarily increase, even as populations grow. Still, people stay. The reason is simple. Stability, even imperfect stability, is preferable to constant uncertainty. The risks of centralized life are balanced by its benefits: shared labor, shared defense, shared meaning. Trade networks now extend farther than before. Copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, stone from distant quarries. These materials do not arrive randomly. They move along established routes, passed from community to community. Each exchange reinforces alliances and shared cultural expectations. Objects from afar carry power beyond their practical use. A shell pendant is not just decoration, it is proof that your community participates in something larger than itself. These items appear in burials of high-status individuals, signaling that influence extends beyond death. Burial practices become more formalized and unequal. Some people are interred beneath house floors. Others are placed in communal cemeteries. A few are buried with elaborate goods, their bodies arranged carefully, deliberately. These differences are remembered. Stories form around them. Children grow up observing these patterns. They learn without being told where they belong in the social order. They know which families host ceremonies, which houses are larger, which lineages matter. The natural world remains central, but it is now interpreted through layers of social meaning. Solar cycles, lunar phases, floods, and droughts are tracked not only for survival, but for legitimacy. Leaders align themselves with cosmic order. Successful harvests become proof of correct ritual practice. You begin to hear the same stories repeated across generations: origin myths, tales of ancestors who emerged from the earth or descended from the sky. These stories are not entertainment. They are instructions for living, justifications for authority, explanations for why things are the way they are. Labor becomes increasingly organized. When large tasks arise: clearing land, building communal structures, people are summoned. Participation is expected. Refusal is noticed. These efforts strengthen community bonds, but they also normalize obedience. And then, gradually, Earth begins to move in ways that serve no immediate practical purpose. At first, it is subtle: small raised platforms, leveled areas made from basket after basket of soil. The work is slow, repetitive, and exhausting. There are no beasts of burden, no metal tools. Dirt is carried by hand, packed carefully. Why do it? Because building something that lasts longer than a single lifetime changes how people think about themselves. It signals permanence. It says, "We will be here tomorrow and the day after that." These early constructions are not yet the massive mounds that will later define Mississippian civilization, but they are precursors, proof that communities can coordinate labor at scale, motivated by shared belief rather than immediate necessity. You sense a shift in mindset. The future is no longer abstract, it is planned. Yet this growing complexity carries tension. Larger populations mean greater vulnerability to environmental change. Centralized authority means failures are more consequential. Ritual promises must be kept, or faith erodes. The society you are watching is becoming impressive, but also brittle. And as labor becomes more concentrated and leaders more symbolically powerful, you might begin to wonder, when does cooperation quietly become control, and how will this balance hold when the pressures of growth finally test it? If you stay long enough, longer than a single human lifetime, you begin to understand that the most important changes are not announced. No one declares the beginning of a new civilization. There is no moment when people decide they are now something different. Instead, the shift happens quietly, carried forward by habit, memory, and the steady weight of decisions made long ago. The earthworks grow. What began as modest platforms and leveled spaces becomes something more deliberate. Soil is no longer moved only when needed for practical reasons. Now it is shaped according to plan. Basket after basket of earth is carried from borrow pits, tamped down, layered carefully. Entire communities participate. Children help. Elders watch. Leaders oversee. These constructions take years, sometimes decades. No one who begins the work expects to see it finished alone. This matters. Building something you will not complete requires belief in continuity, in the idea that your children and grandchildren will remain here, bound by the same obligations. The first true mounds rise slowly from the floodplain. They are not graves at first. They are platforms, raised stages that lift important buildings above the surrounding land. From the top, you can see farther. You are closer to the sky, further from floodwater. The symbolism is obvious, even if it is never explained out loud. Certain structures are rebuilt again and again on the same spot. Each time the old building is burned or dismantled, covered with earth and replaced. The mound grows incrementally, layer by layer, generation by generation. Authority accumulates physically. You notice how people behave around these places. Voices lower. Movement becomes deliberate. Children are corrected more quickly. These spaces command respect without force. Leadership is now institutional. Power no longer belongs only to individuals, it belongs to offices, roles, lineages. A person may die, but their position persists. Ritual calendars are standardized. Seasonal ceremonies occur whether crops are abundant or scarce. Consistency itself becomes sacred. The economy adapts to this new reality. Farmers plant more corn than their families need, knowing surplus will be collected. Some people no longer farm at all. They become full-time builders, artisans, or ritual specialists, supported by redistributed food. This specialization increases efficiency, but it also deepens dependence. If leadership fails, if surplus is mismanaged, many people suffer at once. Environmental pressures begin to show. Forests near large settlements thin from constant clearing. Game becomes harder to find close to towns. Fields must be expanded farther from the center, increasing labor demands. Floods occasionally arrive out of season, destroying crops people assumed were safe. The response is not retreat, but intensification. More rituals, more construction, greater emphasis on cosmic order. When the world feels unstable, meaning becomes more important, not less. Leaders present themselves as mediators between human effort and natural forces. Their legitimacy depends on visible action. Some mounds are now aligned deliberately with celestial events, the solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. You may not understand the calculations involved, but you can see their effects. On certain mornings, the sun rises exactly where it should. The calendar holds. This precision reinforces belief. It suggests that the world can be understood, predicted, controlled if the proper rituals are followed and the proper people remain in charge. But beneath this confidence lies fragility. Skeletal remains from this period show increasing physical strain. People work harder, carry heavier loads, eat more uniform diets. Social inequality leaves marks on bones, some bodies better nourished, others worn thin. Not everyone benefits equally from the new order. Discontent does not always erupt openly. Often it takes the form of quiet movement away. Some families leave growing centers for smaller communities at the margins. Others remain but withdraw from public life as much as possible. Still, the momentum continues. What you are witnessing now is the final transition from scattered riverine societies into what archaeologists will later call the Mississippian world. A culture defined by mound centers, hierarchical leadership, intensive maize agriculture, long-distance trade, and a shared symbolic language stretching across much of eastern North America. By the time the great centers rise places like Cahokia, this foundation has already been laid. The habits of labor coordination, surplus management, ritual authority, and spatial organization are firmly in place. Nothing about this outcome was inevitable. At several points, people could have chosen differently. They could have limited population growth, resisted centralized storage, avoided monumental construction. But each decision made sense in its moment. Each response solved an immediate problem while creating new ones for the future. From within the society, these changes feel like progress. Life is more predictable. Identity is clearer. The world feels ordered. From a distance, you can see the trade-offs. Resilience has shifted. Where once survival depended on flexibility and dispersal, it now depends on coordination and control. The system can support many people, but only as long as everything continues to function. And this is the quiet tension at the heart of Mississippian civilization even before it fully emerges. The same structures that allow it to flourish will one day make it vulnerable to drought, disease, political failure, and environmental strain. As you step back from this moment before the largest mounds dominate the horizon, you are left with a question that echoes far beyond this time and place. When a society succeeds by building permanence, how does it adapt when the world refuses to stay the same? And what happens when the foundations it trusted most begin to shift beneath it? Story 2. Cahokia, the city larger than London. You arrive at Cahokia by water. This is important because almost everyone does. The rivers guide you here long before you see it. Canoes slip along muddy currents carrying people, food, clay, stone, shell, stories. The Mississippi River bends and widens near this place, and its floodplain opens into an expanse so broad and flat that it feels deliberately chosen. The land does not resist settlement. It invites it. At first, Cahokia does not announce itself as extraordinary. There is no wall, no gate, no skyline of stone. What you notice instead is movement, people everywhere, fields stretching outward in carefully managed patches, smoke rising from hundreds then thousands of hearths. By the year 1050 CE, Cahokia is no longer just another river town. It is something North America has never seen before. The population is difficult to calculate precisely, but conservative estimates suggest between 10,000 and 20,000 people live here at its peak. Some scholars argue for even more. What matters is not the exact number, but the comparison. At this time, London holds perhaps 15,000 inhabitants. Paris, maybe 20,000. Cahokia belongs in that category, urban by any reasonable definition. And yet, almost no one living in medieval Europe knows it exists. The city is organized around space in a way that feels intentional and disciplined. You enter a wide central plaza, larger than many modern sports fields. It is kept clear, flattened, maintained. This is not wasted land. It is a stage. On the far side of the plaza rises Monk's Mound. It dominates the landscape not through decoration, but through mass. Built entirely of earth, it covers more ground at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its slopes are carefully angled. Its terraces stepped deliberately. From below, it feels less like a building and more like a rearranged hill, as if the land itself has been persuaded into obedience. You do not climb it casually. The ascent is a physical experience. Each step reminds you of the labor required to make this possible. Millions of baskets of soil, carried by human hands, tamped down without metal tools or draft animals. At the summit stands a large wooden structure, likely the residence or ceremonial center of Cahokia's highest authority. From here, the leader looks out over the plaza, the surrounding neighborhoods, the fields beyond. This is not just a good view. It is a statement about perspective and power. Cahokia is not a city of stone streets or towering walls. Houses are made of wood and clay, arranged in neighborhoods. Some are larger, closer to the central mounds. Others are smaller, more crowded, pushed toward the edges. Social hierarchy is visible in architecture alone. Daily life here is busy but controlled. You wake early because the city wakes early. Fields must be tended beyond the residential zones. Corn is planted, weeded, harvested, dried, stored. Women and men work side by side, though their tasks differ. Children contribute early, carrying water, guarding crops from birds, helping with grinding. Grinding maize is relentless work, stone against stone, hour after hour. The sound is constant, a low background rhythm of survival. The meal is cooked into porridge, baked into flatbreads, mixed with beans and squash when available. Meat is still eaten, deer, fish, birds, but maize dominates. The city demands food. To sustain this population, agriculture around Cahokia is intensified to its limits. Fields stretch miles from the center. Soil fertility must be managed carefully. Floods are both blessing and threat. Too much water wipes out entire harvests. Too little brings hunger. Storage facilities become crucial. Granaries and storage pits are guarded, monitored, redistributed. You do not simply take what you want. Food moves according to rules enforced by authority and ritual expectation. Trade flows into the city continuously. Copper from the north, shells from the Gulf, stone from distant quarries. These materials are not evenly distributed. They cluster in elite contexts: burials, ceremonial spaces, workshops tied to power. Craft specialization flourishes. Some people produce shell beads full-time. Others shape stone tools or copper ornaments. Pottery styles become standardized, signaling shared identity. Art is not about personal expression. It is about conformity to symbols everyone recognizes. Religion permeates everything, but it is not separate from governance. The ruler, whether called chief, priest, or something else entirely derives authority from cosmology. The city itself is laid out as a map of the universe. Mounds represent sacred mountains. The plaza mirrors the middle world. Waterways connect to the underworld. You learn quickly where you belong. Certain paths are not meant for you. Certain rituals are observed from a distance. Certain words are spoken only by certain people. Social boundaries are reinforced not through violence, but through repetition and expectation. Yet Cahokia is not peaceful in a modern sense. Archaeological evidence suggests periodic violence raids, internal conflict, ritualized killing. Defensive palisades are constructed and rebuilt. This is a city aware of its vulnerability. Disease spreads more easily here than in smaller villages. Crowding, poor sanitation, and nutritional stress leave their marks on bones. Infant mortality is high. Life expectancy remains limited. Still, people come. Migration into Cahokia increases during its rise. Some arrive voluntarily, drawn by opportunity, security, or belief. Others may be relocated under pressure. The city absorbs outsiders, reshaping them into Cahokians through labor, ritual, and diet. The scale of coordination required to sustain this place is staggering. Construction projects are ongoing. Ceremonies are frequent. Calendars must be maintained. Authority must be constantly reinforced through visible action. This is not a city that can pause. Every season brings risk: a failed harvest, a flood, a leadership dispute, a breakdown in belief. Cahokia's greatness is inseparable from its precarity. And as you stand in the plaza, watching crowds gather for another ritual whose meaning is both familiar and deeply controlled, you might begin to wonder, how long can a city built entirely of earth, belief, and human labor hold itself together? And what happens if even one of those elements falters? If you stay in Cahokia long enough, you begin to sense that the city is always in motion, even when it appears still. Buildings are repaired constantly. Paths are rerouted. Mounds are reshaped, their slopes adjusted, their surfaces renewed. Nothing here is meant to remain exactly as it is. Stability is maintained through continuous effort. The population churns. People arrive, people leave. People are born and die in numbers large enough that individual lives blur into patterns. You may notice entire neighborhoods that feel newer houses recently built, refuse layers thin, pathways not yet compacted. These are likely migrant zones, areas where newcomers are settled and gradually integrated. Migration is not a side effect of Cahokia's success. It is essential to it. The labor demands of the city are enormous. Fields must be worked far beyond the urban core. Wood must be harvested for construction and fuel. Soil must be moved for ongoing mound projects. Ceremonies require preparation, offerings, rehearsals. Without a steady influx of people, the system strains. Integration happens through routine. New arrivals eat the same food, adopt the same pottery styles, learn the same rituals. Their children grow up Cahokian even if their parents were not. Identity here is practiced, not inherited. But not everyone integrates equally. Social stratification is now unmistakable. Some households enjoy more space, better access to food, and proximity to power. Others live densely, their homes smaller, their diets more limited. These differences appear in skeletal remains variations in height, nutrition, workload. The elite are not idle. Their authority depends on constant visibility. They preside over ceremonies, oversee redistribution, and sponsor construction. They wear distinctive clothing and ornament shell beads, copper plates that mark their status unmistakably. One of the most striking developments in Cahokia during this period is the elaboration of ritual violence. Archaeological evidence from certain burial contexts suggests that human sacrifice was practiced, likely as part of state-sponsored ceremonies. These acts are not random cruelty. They are structured, symbolic, and deeply tied to cosmology. Life is offered to maintain balance, ensure fertility, legitimize authority. From the perspective of those participating, these rituals are necessary. From a distance, they reveal the increasing pressure placed on belief systems to hold society together. Defensive palisades are built, torn down, and rebuilt sometimes multiple times within a century. This suggests both external threats and internal unrest. A city this large cannot rely on informal conflict resolution alone. Boundaries must be marked, enforced, repaired. Environmental stress accumulates quietly. Deforestation around the city accelerates erosion. Fields farther from the center are harder to manage. Flood patterns shift. Droughts occur intermittently, testing food storage systems. The response is rarely to reduce scale. Instead, Cahokia doubles down. More construction, larger ceremonies, greater emphasis on cosmic alignment. When uncertainty increases, leadership responds by asserting order more forcefully. The calendar becomes stricter, ritual observance more demanding. For a time, this works. Around 1100 CE, Cahokia reaches its height. Monk's Mound is fully realized. The city's layout is precise. Trade networks are extensive. Its influence radiates across much of eastern North America. Smaller Mississippian centers mirror its styles and practices, acknowledging its cultural gravity. But success creates expectations. The city must continue to deliver abundance, meaning, and stability. Any failure is magnified by scale. A poor harvest affects thousands. A ritual mistake threatens cosmic balance. A leadership dispute ripples outward through dependent communities. You begin to notice signs of strain. Construction quality varies. Some mounds show erosion damage not fully repaired. Certain neighborhoods thin out. Burials suggest increasing stress and violence. People still believe, but belief is being asked to do more work than ever. And as you watch another ceremonial gathering unfold in the plaza, the leader elevated above the crowd, the rhythms familiar yet urgent, you might begin to wonder. What happens to a city whose power depends on constant proof when the world starts offering fewer reasons to believe? The decline of Cahokia does not arrive with fire or conquest. There is no single enemy at the gates, no final battle remembered in story or song. Instead, the city loosens. At first, the changes are subtle enough that you might miss them if you were not paying close attention. A neighborhood is not rebuilt after a fire. A palisade stands unrepaired longer than expected. A mound erodes slightly between ceremonies. None of these things signal collapse on their own. Large systems absorb small failures all the time. But Cahokia is a system that depends on constant maintenance. Environmental pressures intensify. Tree cover around the city is significantly reduced, altering local hydrology. Fields farther from the center are less fertile and more vulnerable to flooding or drought. The Mississippi's cycles become harder to predict, or perhaps the city has simply reached the limits of what prediction can manage. Food shortages do not appear all at once. Instead, they arrive unevenly. Some neighborhoods suffer more than others. Elite households are buffered by stored surplus, while peripheral areas feel strain earlier. Social inequality becomes harder to ignore. Skeletal evidence suggests rising malnutrition, increased disease, and higher rates of violent injury. Stress fractures and signs of overwork are common. Infant mortality increases. These are not the marks of sudden disaster, but of prolonged difficulty. Belief systems strain under the weight of unmet expectations. Ritual calendars continue, but outcomes disappoint. A ceremony meant to ensure fertility coincides with a poor harvest. A carefully timed solar alignment fails to bring relief. Each failure chips away at confidence. Leaders respond as they always have, with more ritual, more labor, more demand. But participation begins to wane. Some people leave. This is one of the most important and least dramatic aspects of Cahokia's decline. There is no mass exodus on a single day. Instead, families quietly relocate. They return to smaller communities along tributaries. They join emerging Mississippian centers elsewhere. They take knowledge, skills, and traditions with them. Cahokia's influence does not vanish, it disperses. The population drops steadily after around 1200 CE. Large-scale construction ceases. Monk's Mound remains, but its summit buildings are no longer rebuilt with the same care. The plaza grows less crowded. Ceremonies continue, but on a reduced scale. Defensive structures are abandoned. Trade networks thin. Materials from distant regions become rarer. The city no longer sits at the center of a vast web. It becomes just one place among many. Importantly, the people do not disappear. They adapt. The skills developed at Cahokia, intensive agriculture, social organization, ritual leadership, artistic styles, are carried outward. New Mississippian centers rise elsewhere, smaller and more flexible. These societies learn from Cahokia's excesses as much as from its achievements. By the time Europeans arrive centuries later, Cahokia is already quiet. Trees grow on its mounds. Its former fields return to forest. There are no written records to explain what happened, only earth shaped by human hands and scattered remains beneath the soil. European observers will struggle to comprehend what they see. Some will refuse to believe indigenous people built the mounds at all, inventing lost civilizations rather than acknowledge the complexity of the societies before them. But the truth is simpler and more instructive. Cahokia rose because people learned how to cooperate at an unprecedented scale. It fell because cooperation became too rigid, too dependent on constant growth and control. When conditions changed, flexibility mattered more than monumentality. Standing at the edge of the abandoned plaza, with grass reclaiming its surface and birds nesting where crowds once gathered, you are left not with mystery, but with recognition. Cahokia was not a failure. It was an experiment, ambitious, fragile, human. And its story asks a question that still matters. How large can a society grow before the systems that hold it together become the very things that pull it apart? And what does survival look like when letting go becomes the only path forward? Story 3. Corn, clay, and control, agriculture and daily survival. If you want to understand the Mississippian world, not its rulers, not its mounds, not even its cities, you begin not with ceremony, but with food. Everything else rests on it. You wake before sunrise because crops do not wait. The air is heavy, already warm, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke from last night's fires. Your body knows the routine even if your mind drifts. There is corn to tend, and corn is unforgiving of delay. Maize is no longer just one crop among many. It is the foundation of survival. Fields stretch outward from settlements in careful patterns, broken by paths and drainage channels. The soil is rich, but only if it is managed properly. Too much planting exhausts it. Too little risks hunger. You do not farm alone. Extended families work adjacent plots, coordinating planting and harvesting. Children scare birds away. Elders watch the sky. Everyone knows the signs when rain is coming, when frost threatens, when the river is rising too fast. Corn is planted in mounds of soil, often alongside beans and squash. This trio supports itself. Beans fix nitrogen, squash shades the ground, corn provides structure. It is efficient, but it demands attention. Weeds grow fast here. Pests arrive without warning. Harvest season is exhausting. Ears are snapped from stalks, husked, dried. Grain is stored carefully in pits lined with bark or clay. Moisture ruins everything. Rodents must be kept out. A single mistake can cost a family months of food. Grinding maize is constant labor. Stone metates and manos wear down slowly, reshaped again and again. The sound of grinding defines daily life, especially for women who bear the brunt of this work. Your shoulders ache, your wrists stiffen. This is the price of surplus. Corn feeds more people, but it narrows the diet. Dental wear is severe. Nutritional deficiencies appear gradually. Bodies adapt, but imperfectly. Survival improves in one sense while declining in another. Pottery becomes essential to this new way of life. Clay vessels store grain, cook food, carry water. They are shaped by hand, smoothed, fired in open pits. Styles vary by region, but function dominates form. A cracked pot is a serious problem. Replacing it takes time and fuel. You repair what you can. Broken pottery is reused as temper or fill. Nothing is wasted casually. Even fragments have purpose. Water management matters more now than ever. Settlements are placed near reliable sources, but flooding is unpredictable. Drainage ditches are maintained. Fields are positioned to take advantage of seasonal overflow without being destroyed by it. This is not romantic labor. It is repetitive, physically demanding, and relentless. There are no days off. Even during ceremonies, food production continues in the background. Ritual does not replace work, it justifies it. Control enters daily life quietly through these routines. As agriculture intensifies, coordination becomes necessary. Planting schedules must align. Fields must be protected. Surplus must be collected and stored. Someone decides how much grain goes where and when. At first, this feels practical. During a bad year, stored food saves lives. During a good year, surplus supports specialists, builders, artisans, ritual leaders. Cooperation is rewarded. But over time, access to food becomes access to power. You notice that some storage pits are not shared equally. Certain households always seem to have more. Certain people speak with authority about redistribution. Refusal to comply is rare, not because of force, but because dependence has grown quietly. Daily survival now ties individuals to systems larger than themselves. Even clay, once gathered freely, becomes regulated. Good sources are known and claimed. Certain families specialize in pottery production, supplying others in exchange for food or status. Skills concentrate. Independence narrows. Seasonal hunger still exists. Late winter is hardest. Stores run low. Illness spreads more easily. The promise of spring keeps people moving, planting even when bodies are worn thin. Children grow up inside this rhythm. They learn not through instruction but through repetition. By adolescence, their bodies already show signs of labor: calloused hands, strong backs, worn joints. Survival is not optional, it is expected. And yet people persist. They sing while they work. Stories are told during long grinding hours. Small rituals mark planting and harvest. These moments do not ease the labor, but they make it meaningful. You begin to understand that Mississippian civilization is not built by grand decisions, but by millions of ordinary actions repeated without pause. Corn planted, clay shaped, food shared or withheld. The mounds rise because fields are productive. Leaders rule because granaries are full. Ritual works because people are fed enough to believe. And as you watch another planting season begin, knowing that a single flood or drought could unravel months of effort, you might quietly ask yourself, what happens to a society when the systems that keep everyone alive also decide who holds power, and how much control can grow out of something as ordinary as a field of corn? As seasons repeat, you begin to feel how agriculture shapes not just your labor but your thinking. Time itself reorganizes around planting and harvest. The year is no longer an open stretch of days. It is segmented, measured, anticipated. You know what you should be doing months in advance because the land allows little improvisation. Spring arrives with urgency. Fields must be cleared of debris left by winter floods. Stalks from last year's harvest are cut down or burned. Ash enriches the soil, but only if spread carefully. Too much fire damages future yields. too little leaves pests behind. Seed corn is selected with care. Not all kernels are equal. You save the best from the previous harvest plump, undamaged, reliable. Choosing poorly is a quiet gamble. A bad decision now will not reveal itself until months later when it is too late to fix. Planting is communal but not equal. Some fields are larger, better positioned, closer to water. These belong to families with influence or ritual responsibility. Smaller plots lie farther out, more exposed to drought or flooding. This imbalance is not announced, it is simply understood. As crops grow, surveillance increases. Fields are watched for theft, animal damage, neglect. Children are sent to scare birds away, their days spent shouting and waving from dawn to dusk. They learn early that food is guarded, not assumed. By midsummer, labor shifts again. Weeding intensifies. Repairs are constant fences, ditches, storage pits. Heat exhausts even the strongest bodies. Illness spreads more easily now, carried by insects and water. There is no pause. Falling behind means hunger later. Control tightens during this period, though it rarely feels like oppression. Leaders or their representatives visit fields, offering advice, assessing yields. These visits are framed as guidance, but they also serve to measure compliance. Everyone knows who is producing enough and who is not. When harvest finally arrives, relief mixes with anxiety. Yields are never guaranteed. Some years bring abundance. Others barely meet expectations. The act of harvesting is hurried but careful. Ears are counted, sorted, dried. Storage pits fill slowly, then are sealed. This is when redistribution becomes visible. Communal granaries are stocked first. Tribute, though it may not be called, that is collected. Households contribute a portion of their harvest, trusting that it will return to them in times of need. This trust is reinforced by ritual and tradition. It is also enforced by social pressure. Those who fail to contribute are remembered. Food moves through the community in patterns that reveal hierarchy. Elites host feasts, redistributing surplus publicly. These events reinforce loyalty and obligation. Eating together is not just nourishment, it is a political act. Accepting food binds you to the giver. Pottery production intensifies after harvest. With grain stored, time opens briefly for other tasks. Clay is gathered before winter freezes the ground. Vessels are shaped, dried, fired. Women pass down techniques to daughters. Subtle differences in style mark identity and affiliation. Broken pots accumulate. Shards are swept aside, crushed, reused. Refuse piles grow, layer upon layer. These middens will one day tell stories of consumption and survival, but for now they are simply part of the landscape. Winter brings its own discipline. Movement slows, diets narrow further. Cornmeal, beans, dried squash. Meat is scarce. Fires burn constantly. Smoke thickens inside houses, irritating eyes and lungs. Repairs continue indoors, tools sharpened, nets mended, baskets rewoven. This is when hunger tests the system. Stores dwindle. Illness weakens bodies already strained. Those with surplus gain influence simply by surviving comfortably. Requests for food are negotiated carefully. Repayment is expected, though not always immediate. Debt becomes social rather than monetary, owed in labor, loyalty, or future harvests. Children suffer most during lean winters. Growth slows. Some do not survive. These losses are mourned, but they are also normalized. Life here is resilient, but it is not gentle. By late winter, ritual activity increases. Ceremonies ask for renewal, fertility, balance. The promise of spring must be reinforced, especially when hunger erodes patience. Leaders appear more often, visible reminders that order still holds. And then the cycle begins again. What you may not notice immediately, but what becomes clear over years, is how little room remains for deviation. Agricultural life rewards conformity. Plant when others plant. Store as others store. Share as expected. Those who resist quietly are pressured back into alignment. Innovation is slow and cautious. Experimenting with new crops or techniques risks failure that affects more than just one household. Stability becomes the highest value, even when it carries hidden costs. This is the paradox of Mississippian agriculture. It creates abundance but demands obedience. It allows cities to rise, but ties individuals tightly to systems they cannot easily escape. Corn is not just food. It is schedule, obligation, identity. As you prepare for another planting season, hands already aching in anticipation, you might find yourself wondering not in anger, but in quiet curiosity. When survival depends on shared routines and centralized control, how much choice does an individual truly have? And what happens when the land itself no longer follows the rules everyone depends on? By the time you have lived through many cycles of planting and harvest, you understand that survival in the Mississippian world is not simply about producing food. It is about maintaining a system that expects continuity season after season, generation after generation. The land, however, does not share that expectation. Environmental shifts are rarely dramatic at first. A slightly shorter growing season, rain that arrives late or leaves early, floodwaters that linger longer than usual. Each change is small enough to explain away, but together they begin to strain routines built on predictability. When yields drop, the first response is intensification. Fields are expanded farther from settlements. Marginal land is pressed into use. Labor demands increase. People work longer hours for diminishing returns. This is not framed as crisis, it is framed as responsibility. Storage practices become stricter. Granaries are more closely monitored. Redistribution grows more conditional. Leaders emphasize discipline and ritual correctness. If the land is failing, it must be because humans have failed to maintain balance. Clay vessels multiply as people attempt to preserve every possible surplus. Pits are dug deeper. Repairs are constant. Even small losses feel intolerable now. The human cost becomes visible in bodies. Archaeological evidence from late Mississippian contexts shows increased signs of malnutrition, infectious disease, and physical stress. Teeth wear more severely. Bones bear the marks of repetitive labor and inadequate nutrition. And yet communities endure. Families adapt by diversifying where they can, supplementing diets with more wild foods, fishing more intensively, traveling farther to hunt. These strategies help, but they also pull people away from centralized routines, loosening the grip of authority. Control responds by tightening. Rituals become more elaborate, more frequent. Leaders emphasize their role as mediators between humans and the environment. Feasts become more symbolic, even when food is scarce. Participation is expected. Absence is noticed. Some people begin to resist quietly, not through open rebellion, but through withdrawal. They move to smaller settlements. They reduce participation in large-scale projects. They rely more on kin networks than central authorities. This is how systems change, not with collapse, but with erosion. As central places lose population and influence, new patterns emerge. Smaller Mississippian communities adapt more flexibly, combining agriculture with foraging, maintaining social hierarchies that are less rigid. The knowledge of corn cultivation remains, but it is used differently. The great cities fade, but the agricultural lifeways persist. Corn continues to be planted. Clay continues to be shaped. Daily survival remains labor-intensive and uncertain. What changes is scale. What changes is control. From a distance, it may look like decline. From within, it feels like adjustment. Mississippian agriculture does not fail. It transforms. The practices developed over centuries, crop management, storage, seasonal planning, continue to sustain communities long after monumental centers are abandoned. What is lost is not knowledge, but concentration. And this, perhaps, is the lesson carried forward. As you imagine yourself at the edge of a field that has been worked by countless hands before yours, soil dark and heavy with history, you are reminded that survival is never static. Systems that work at one scale may falter at another. Control can nourish, but it can also constrain. The Mississippian world shows you that civilization is built not only on surplus, but on choices about how tightly to organize, how much to demand, and when to let go. And as you prepare once more to press seeds into the earth, aware that the future depends on forces beyond your control, you might ask, how many societies have mistaken stability for permanence, and how many times has survival required not more control, but less? Story 4. The people of the river trade, travel, and long-distance exchange. If you want to understand Mississippian life beyond fields and houses, you must follow the rivers. They are the arteries of the civilization, carrying people, goods, and ideas across hundreds of miles. The Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, and their tributaries do more than provide water. They define the possibilities of movement, settlement, and connection. You are in a small riverside village. The water glistens in the morning sun. Canoes lie at the bank, dug from single tree trunks or sewn together from planks. You hear the quiet slap of paddles and the occasional shout of children. Every journey begins with preparation, packing food, wrapping clay and stone, checking that fragile goods will survive the trip. Trade is not casual. Every object carries value, practical, symbolic, or both. Shells from the Gulf Coast travel hundreds of miles inland. Copper comes from the Great Lakes. Obsidian, flint, and stone tools follow paths known only to generations of travelers. These materials are not just decoration. They represent alliances, status, and knowledge. The act of moving them is ritualized, even if you do not yet recognize it. Certain gifts are expected. Certain directions are honored. Reciprocity is essential. Failure to return a favor or follow protocol could damage relationships for decades. Trade is as much about trust as it is about materials. People travel on foot as well. Footpaths cut through forests, connecting villages to one another and to seasonal hunting grounds. Some routes are used only at certain times of year, dictated by water levels, weather, and social calendars. Guides memorize the terrain, knowing where the land is soft, where streams swell after rains, where predators lurk. Canoes allow speed and volume. A single trip can move dozens of people, hundreds of pounds of goods. Travel is still dangerous. Floods, storms, or hostile encounters can destroy cargo and lives. Planning, timing, and knowledge of the river are crucial. The rivers also carry ideas. Pottery styles, ceremonial practices, and even social hierarchies spread along these waterways. Communities that never meet directly may adopt similar motifs, share similar mound layouts, or mirror rituals practiced miles away. You notice a shell necklace, and the pattern is identical to one you saw hundreds of miles upstream. This is not coincidence. It is the product of sustained communication. Trade networks are hierarchical, not uniform. Certain hubs like Cahokia, Etowah, or Moundville act as central nodes. Goods pass through them, accumulating value, meaning, and prestige. Control over these hubs enhances power, not just wealth. Influence radiates outward from places connected to many others. You also notice subtler forms of exchange. Knowledge is traded along with objects. Seasonal patterns, ritual instructions, techniques for working clay or stone. Travelers carry more than goods. They carry expertise, stories, and expectations. These intangible materials are often more valuable than the objects themselves. Some journeys are for survival rather than commerce. Seasonal fishing, hunting, or gathering trips can span days or weeks. Groups move with rhythm, following animal migrations or plant cycles. These trips reinforce social bonds, teach navigation, and maintain awareness of distant landscapes. Danger is constant, but so is necessity. Rivers flood unpredictably. Rapids, snags, and shifting sandbars threaten every canoe. Footpaths vanish under water or overgrowth. Banditry, while not universal, is possible, especially near choke points or resource-rich areas. Travelers prepare contingencies, carry extra food, and maintain weapons, simple spears or clubs, to protect themselves. Trade also reinforces social hierarchies. Those who control surplus grain, crafted goods, or exotic items exercise authority over both local communities and distant partners. Leaders offer access to rare shells or copper as both reward and obligation. Acceptance of these gifts binds recipients to social networks, extending influence far beyond immediate geography. Yet trade is more than control. It is social glue. Communities separated by hundreds of miles recognize shared patterns, participate in synchronized rituals, and reinforce cultural identity. Without these networks, villages risk isolation, vulnerability, and stagnation. The rivers teach patience, observation, and foresight. A successful trader must anticipate seasonal changes, weather, and social needs. Every miscalculation carries cost not just to yourself, but to your kin and community. You notice children learning early. They watch elders load canoes, remember routes, memorize trading partners. Knowledge passes quietly through repeated observation and participation. By adolescence, they can undertake short trips alone or with peers, gradually learning the responsibilities and risks of long-distance movement. Even with all this organization, uncertainty remains. A single failed trip can ripple through a community. Delayed or lost goods disrupt rituals, weaken alliances, and challenge authority. Survival is inseparable from competence on these waterways. And yet, despite danger, hardship, and unpredictability, these river networks persist and thrive. They allow Cahokia to rise, smaller centers to flourish, and ideas to spread across a vast landscape long before written communication or wheeled vehicles exist. You step back, watching canoes slip silently along the current, imagining the hundreds of hands, eyes, and minds it takes to keep these networks functioning. And then you ask yourself, how does a civilization depend on rivers not only for food, but for power, knowledge, and connection? And what happens when the currents shift or the paths become too dangerous to follow? If you stay with the river long enough, you begin to notice patterns that are invisible to casual observation. Trade is not random. Paths are chosen carefully, repeated annually, passed down across generations. Some routes are sacred, others purely practical. Travelers navigate a mental map as precise as any modern GPS, memorized through experience rather than technology. The act of traveling itself reinforces social order. Canoes carry more than cargo, they carry obligations. A missed delivery is noticed. A forgotten offering damages trust. Every journey is simultaneously economic, social, and ritual. You cannot separate these elements. Survival demands that they coexist. Trade hubs emerge naturally along these routes. Cahokia, Moundville, Etowah, Spiro, these centers are nodes in a network where travelers converge. They bring goods from distant lands, copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, mica from the Appalachians. Each object carries a story, a lineage of hands that shaped it, rivers that bore it, and rituals that sanctified it. Ownership is about more than possession, it is about connection. The hubs also enforce hierarchy. Leaders manage surplus and storage, decide which items are distributed publicly, and host feasts that reaffirm their authority. Accepting goods from a leader is not a neutral act. It acknowledges their social and spiritual influence. Trade is inseparable from politics. You notice another layer, specialization. Not everyone produces all they need. Certain villages focus on pottery, others on copper work, still others on fine shell beads. This division of labor requires trust and coordination. Communities cannot survive alone, they must depend on distant neighbors for materials, techniques, and expertise. Each canoe trip is a thread weaving together interdependent societies. Long-distance exchange also shapes innovation. Pottery designs spread across hundreds of miles, standardized by common aesthetics and ritual requirements. Techniques in toolmaking diffuse quietly. Ideas about ritual, cosmology, and social organization travel with them. A small object, a copper plate, a shell pendant, can carry as much knowledge as it does value. Travel is not without risk. Floods can delay river trips for weeks. Rapids overturn canoes. Footpaths are treacherous in wet seasons. Hostile encounters, rare but possible, require vigilance. Traders carry weapons, extra provisions, and knowledge of safe houses along the way. Every journey is a test of foresight and skill. Children learn early by observation. They memorize routes, watch elders negotiate exchanges, learn which rituals accompany particular gifts. By adolescence, many can navigate small trips alone, carrying messages or small goods. The rivers themselves become teachers. Currents, eddies, and seasonal changes inform every decision. Trade networks also respond to scarcity and abundance. When a harvest fails in one region, a nearby community may supply grain, establishing reliance and reinforcing social bonds. Surplus flows outward, deficits are mitigated. Yet these same flows create inequality. Those with more access to distant goods gain prestige. Control over networks becomes power. This dependence on rivers and long-distance connections makes the civilization both strong and vulnerable. Connectivity allows ideas, goods, and resources to move rapidly, but disruption, whether from environmental change, conflict, or disease, can cascade across vast distances. A broken route is not just inconvenient, it threatens survival and authority simultaneously. The symbolic weight of goods magnifies their practical importance. Marine shells are valuable because they are rare, but they also represent spiritual potency and long-distance connection. Copper carries prestige and ritual significance. Objects from afar are markers of identity and status, reminding participants of both their place in the world and their obligations to others. Participation in trade reinforces hierarchy as much as it sustains life. People who organize expeditions, store goods, or host travelers consolidate influence. Their actions become remembered, their lineages respected. In this way, rivers shape not only the physical landscape, but the social and spiritual terrain as well. Yet despite all the planning, observation, and ceremony, uncertainty persists. Rivers flood unexpectedly. Seasonal patterns shift. Political alliances falter. A single misjudgment, an unsafe passage, a missed payment, a poorly timed gift can ripple across hundreds of miles. The system demands attention and adaptation, yet never guarantees success. And as you watch traders set off once more, paddles cutting quietly through the reflective surface, carrying food, shell, copper, and knowledge to distant communities, you realize that Mississippian civilization depends as much on movement and connection as it does on agriculture or mounds. Its very existence relies on these river pathways and the people brave enough to navigate them. And so, standing on the bank of a winding river, you may ask yourself, how does a civilization maintain cohesion when its lifeblood flows in unpredictable currents? And what happens when the connections that hold people together begin to fray? Over decades, the river networks shape not only where people live, but how they live. Communities along tributaries and floodplains depend on one another in ways that are both practical and invisible. A single village cannot survive isolation. Too many essential goods, skills, and knowledge lie elsewhere. Interdependence is constant, and yet it is balanced by autonomy. Each settlement retains control over its own fields, households, and local rituals. At the major hubs, influence is magnified. Leaders oversee the movement of goods and labor. They sponsor feasts and ceremonies that bind distant communities to the city, reminding everyone that survival, ritual, and prestige are intertwined. The presence of exotic objects, copper plates, marine shells, Mica ornaments is both a reward and a subtle assertion of control. Participation in these networks is voluntary only in appearance. Refusal has social consequences that ripple quietly through the community. Trade also shapes risk in unexpected ways. Canoes capsized, floods destroyed goods, and banditry could steal months of surplus in a single night. Seasonal patterns shift unpredictably. Droughts limit agricultural output, leaving less for trade. Yet the system adapts. When one route fails, alternative paths are taken. When surplus runs low, negotiation becomes more creative, alliances are reinforced, and ritual importance increases to maintain cohesion. The network is resilient, but fragile, like a web stretched taut over a river valley. By the 13th century, signs of stress appear in these networks. Cahokia's influence begins to waver. Peripheral centers struggle with fluctuating trade. Some previously reliable routes fall into disuse. Distant partners, dependent on centralized distribution of surplus, are forced to reorganize local strategies. Communities adapt by relying more heavily on local resources, less on distant connections. The resilience that once seemed limitless is tested by environmental change, social tension, and the sheer scale of reliance. And yet knowledge flows onward. Even as trade networks weaken, techniques in pottery, agriculture, and construction persist. Mound-building methods, ritual practices, and social organization ideas travel to smaller, more flexible centers. The expertise accumulated over centuries does not vanish with a city's decline. Instead, it diffuses, leaving a lasting legacy across the region. The rivers themselves continue to define life, even as human patterns shift. Some tributaries are abandoned. Some become conduits for smaller, self-sufficient communities. Floodplains that once supported dense urban populations gradually return to forest or meadow. The land reclaims its place, slowly erasing visible signs of human labor while preserving intangible patterns of knowledge and connection. As you watch a lone canoe drift past a silvery bend of the river, you realize the profound paradox of Mississippian trade. Its very success depends on movement, connection, and interdependence. Yet these same qualities make the civilization vulnerable. A civilization cannot be stronger than the networks that sustain it, and when those networks fray, even the most monumental achievements are at risk. And in this quiet, reflective moment, with water stretching into the horizon and no sound but the lapping of the river, the question lingers. How can a civilization thrive when its lifeblood flows beyond its control? And what happens when the currents that sustain society begin to shift faster than people can respond? Story 5. Moundville and the Ritual of Power Ceremonies and Social Hierarchy. If you travel west from Cahokia along the Mississippi River and its tributaries, you eventually arrive at Moundville, a city smaller than Cahokia, but no less impressive in its purpose and organization. Here, the focus is not just on survival or trade, but on the ritualized display of social hierarchy. Life revolves around mounds, plazas, and ceremonial spaces designed to reinforce authority, connection, and belief. The city is arranged deliberately. Earthen mounds rise in symmetrical patterns around a central plaza, a carefully cleared and leveled space that functions as the heart of public life. The largest mounds serve as platforms for elite residences or temples. Smaller mounds may house lesser leaders, priests, or serve as burial sites. Every elevation signals status. The higher you live, the closer you are symbolically, socially, and spiritually to the center of power. Daily life is intertwined with ritual. People do not simply work, they prepare, observe, and participate. Food is offered, songs are sung, dances performed. These practices are more than cultural flourishes, they are mechanisms to maintain social cohesion. Everyone knows their place. The common farmer, grinding maize and tending fields, watches from the plaza edges as leaders occupy elevated structures, their movements precise, rehearsed, meaningful. Crafts are linked to ritual. Pottery is decorated with motifs that denote affiliation, status, or spiritual significance. Shell and copper ornaments are not mere decoration, they are markers of rank and ritual authority. A person wearing a specific pattern signals their connection to lineage, office, or ceremony. These visual cues are understood by all and reinforce social expectations silently, consistently. The mounds themselves are labor-intensive constructions, carried out over years with coordinated effort. Families bring baskets of soil from borrowed pits, tamping it down carefully. The work is repetitive, exhausting, and essential. Through this labor, the community enacts obedience and shared purpose. Each layer of earth is a physical manifestation of social order. Ceremonies punctuate the year. Seasonal festivals, astronomical events, and life cycle rituals all occur on or around the mounds. Feasts bring the community together, redistributing surplus food, reinforcing loyalty, and demonstrating the leader's ability to provide. Observing these events, you notice that they are carefully orchestrated. Seating arrangements, processions, and offerings follow established patterns. Deviations are rare and often corrected. Burials are a powerful component of social ritual. Elite individuals are interred with grave goods, copper plates, shell ornaments, elaborately decorated pottery. These burials are not private, they are statements to the living about continuity, power, and the consequences of status. Lesser members of society are interred differently, sometimes beneath house floors, sometimes in communal spaces, signaling their role in the broader hierarchy. Mortality itself is a stage for social order. Children are socialized into this hierarchy from an early age. They watch who speaks first, who receives offerings, who occupies elevated positions. By adolescence, they understand their expected roles, the obligations of their lineage, and the rituals that define civic life. Participation in these practices is learned quietly, through observation, repetition, and correction, rather than through explicit instruction. The city depends on ritual for stability. Leaders derive legitimacy from their ability to organize labor, redistribute resources, and conduct ceremonies successfully. If ceremonies fail or surplus runs low, authority weakens. Power is conditional, maintained by visible success in both the spiritual and material realms. Yet even with these structures, tension exists. Mound construction requires enormous effort, diverting labor from fields, hunting, or crafts. Social stratification creates inequalities that can breed resentment. Rituals are demanding. Leadership requires constant attention, negotiation, and management. The system works, but it is delicate. Moundville's significance is amplified by its connectivity. It is part of a broader Mississippian network. Objects, knowledge, and people move along rivers and trails, linking it to Cahokia, Etowah, and other centers. Status symbols, shell gorgets, copper plates may arrive from distant sources, reinforcing prestige and connecting ritual authority to a larger social landscape. Even as the city functions as a hub of ceremonial life, the ordinary daily work continues quietly in parallel. Fields produce maize, craftsmen shape clay and stone, hunters bring meat, women and men manage households. The extraordinary, the mounds, the feasts, the ceremonies exists because the ordinary work has been maintained consistently for generations. And yet, in observing this intricate system, you notice a subtle tension. The labor, wealth, and coordination that sustain ritual authority also create vulnerability. If labor fails, if surplus falters, or if belief diminishes, the hierarchy becomes brittle. Social cohesion rests on continuous demonstration of power, provision, and spiritual legitimacy. As you stand at the edge of the plaza, watching elders arrange offerings and young participants rehearse dances under the gaze of elevated leaders, you might quietly consider: when power depends on ceremonial display and the visible participation of the community, what happens if the people who maintain it begin to question their role, or if the system they uphold can no longer sustain them? If you remain in Moundville through a full cycle of seasons, you begin to understand how deeply ritual shapes daily life. Authority is not only expressed in ceremonies, it is reinforced constantly through routine, labor, and subtle observation. Every action, from preparing food to shaping pottery, is quietly tied to the social structure and ceremonial expectations. Labor at this stage becomes more organized. Families are assigned specific roles in mound maintenance. Some collect soil from distant borrow pits, others tamp and layer it carefully. Children fetch water or carry small baskets, learning not only the physical task but the social rhythm that underpins it. Work itself becomes a ritual, a constant reinforcement of hierarchy. Every mound grows taller, wider, and more deliberate as the community contributes incrementally, generation by generation. Elite authority relies on both visibility and scarcity. Only leaders, their families, and ritual specialists can occupy the highest mounds. They oversee ceremonies, redistribute food, and manage trade of valuable items. Copper plates, marine shells, and elaborately decorated pottery signal not only spiritual authority, but also access to distant networks. Their prestige is amplified by what ordinary villagers cannot easily obtain. Feasts are particularly important. Surplus food is shared selectively, reinforcing loyalty while reminding everyone of dependence. These gatherings are elaborate, with specific seating arrangements, musical patterns, and offerings aligned to ritual calendars. Observing carefully, you notice that even small gestures who receives the first portion, how offerings are arranged, the timing of song and dance carry meaning. Missteps are corrected immediately. The social lesson is implicit and clear. Burials continue to reinforce social differentiation. Elite individuals are interred with rich grave goods and positioned in prominent locations on mounds. Lesser members of society are buried closer to domestic spaces, often with minimal or functional items. Children may be interred with symbolic objects, subtly teaching future generations about hierarchy. The spatial placement of graves tells a story as loudly as words could. It communicates authority, continuity, and obligation. Trade remains tied to ritual life. Exotic goods, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, mica from the Appalachians, are incorporated into ceremonies, consolidating authority and reinforcing social norms. Leaders who control these flows enhance their power, while common households rely on the redistribution that these objects symbolize. The ritual and economic spheres are inseparable. Yet even as ceremonies and displays of power dominate the city, you begin to notice strain beneath the surface. Labor demands are relentless. The elite rely on a workforce that must produce both food and material goods while simultaneously participating in ceremonial obligations. Seasonal shortages, poor harvests, or illness disrupt this balance, creating tension that cannot be expressed openly, but is evident in subtle signs: reduced participation, complaints, or minor acts of resistance. Women play a crucial, though often underappreciated, role. They manage households, produce pottery, prepare food for feasts, and maintain storage systems. Their labor is indispensable to sustaining both daily life and ceremonial authority. Without their consistent contribution, the mounds could not grow, rituals could not proceed, and leaders would lose legitimacy. Children absorb this system through observation and practice. From an early age, they learn the rhythms of labor and ceremony, the significance of social positioning, and the expectations placed on different classes. By adolescence, most can participate in rituals, contribute to labor, and understand the hierarchy intuitively. The next generation is prepared to continue the system almost seamlessly. Still, the city is fragile. Social cohesion depends on constant reinforcement. Authority is never taken for granted. Every feast, every ceremony, every redistribution of goods serves as a demonstration that the system works. Miss a season, mismanage resources, or fail to maintain the mounds, and cracks appear. A single failure may ripple outward, weakening both ritual authority and social compliance. By observing carefully, you start to understand the paradox of Moundville. The very structures and rituals that give it strength also make it dependent on continuous labor, surveillance, and belief. Success demands meticulous attention, Neglect leads to erosion both of mounds and of social order. As another ceremonial season begins, the city hums with activity. Laborers tend the mounds, priests and specialists prepare offerings, children rehearse dances, and elite leaders oversee from elevated platforms. The system seems self-sustaining, but you can sense the quiet tension underlying it. And as you watch the interplay of labor, ritual, and authority, you might quietly ponder. What happens when a society built on ceremonial display, controlled labor, and ritualized power encounters failure, whether environmental, social, or political, and the systems it depends upon begin to strain under their own weight? Over time, the delicate balance at Moundville begins to show signs of strain, though not through sudden catastrophe. There is no invading army, no dramatic flood, just the slow, persistent pressures of maintaining a complex ceremonial and social system. Labor demands, population pressures, environmental variability, and the ever-present need for ritual legitimacy converge, testing the resilience of both people and hierarchy. The mounds continue to grow, but more slowly. Some terraces erode before they can be repaired. Smaller platforms receive less attention, reflecting subtle shifts in labor allocation or priority. Households farther from the plaza may feel neglected or less integrated, creating quiet fissures in community cohesion. These are not open revolts. They are the invisible wear of a system pushed to its limits. Resource management becomes more critical and more difficult. Surplus must be carefully monitored to support feasts and ceremonies. Any shortfall risks undermining authority. Leaders respond with heightened ritual activity, attempting to reinforce legitimacy and maintain social cohesion. But rituals alone cannot replace food or labor. Authority is challenged not by rebellion, but by the slow erosion of capacity. Trade networks so vital to reinforcing status and supplying ceremonial goods also face stress. Materials from distant regions arrive less reliably. Copper plates, marine shells, and mica ornaments become scarcer. Those who previously relied on these objects for prestige must adapt, either by consolidating what they have or finding local alternatives. Authority becomes increasingly dependent on scarcity. Fewer rare objects magnify perceived power, but also increase tension over distribution. The daily life of ordinary people continues, but the burden grows. Fields must be maintained, granaries monitored, households repaired, pottery produced, and labor contributed to mound construction. Illness and seasonal hunger persist, quietly weakening populations. Children grow accustomed to these pressures early, inheriting both knowledge and responsibility. Survival is possible, but it is never easy. Social hierarchy, meanwhile, persists through ritual. Ceremonies, feasts, and burials continue to mark distinction between elite and commoner. Yet as material resources become more constrained, hierarchy becomes simultaneously more visible and more precarious. Prestige can be reinforced symbolically, but power rooted in tangible wealth or control over labor grows fragile. By the late Mississippian period, some mounds are no longer maintained as meticulously. Households on the periphery shrink. Participation in large-scale ceremonies diminishes. The city's influence over surrounding areas declines. Populations shift towards smaller, more flexible communities that can adapt quickly to environmental or social pressures. The grandest mounds remain as markers of memory and past authority, but the city itself is evolving, gradually fragmenting into a network of less centralized settlements. Yet the legacy of Moundville endures. The knowledge of mound construction, ceremonial organization, ritual feasting, and social stratification continues to influence neighboring regions. Even as centralized authority wanes, the cultural practices developed here shape the broader Mississippian world for generations. Power, prestige, and hierarchy may shift in scale, but the principles remain. Standing at the edge of the largest mound, observing the plaza that once pulsed with ceremonial energy, You notice how the work of generations has left a visible mark on the landscape. The mounds are monumental, yes, but they are also fragile. Their endurance depends entirely on human labor, coordination, and belief. And as you contemplate this intricate interplay of authority, labor, and ritual, you are left with a question that resonates beyond Moundville itself. How does a society maintain power and cohesion when authority depends on continuous demonstration, scarce resources, and the unquestioning participation of the people? And what happens when any one of these elements falters? Story 6. Life along the floodplain's villages, homes, and daily survival. Away from the monumental centers like Cahokia and Moundville, life along the Mississippi and its tributaries unfolds in ways that are quieter but no less essential. Villages are the backbone of Mississippian society, where most people live, work, and maintain the systems that support urban centers. Understanding these settlements offers insight into the resilience, adaptability, and routines that make civilization possible. Villages are strategically placed. Proximity to rivers and streams is vital for water, transportation, and fertile floodplain soils. Settlers understand the rhythms of the river. Spring floods replenish fields, deposit nutrient-rich silt, and provide fish, but they also threaten homes and storage. Villagers plan accordingly, building dwellings on slightly elevated land or constructing raised platforms to protect against high water. Houses are generally rectangular, built with wooden frames and wattle and daub wall sticks woven together, covered with mud. Roofs are thatched with river cane or grasses. Interiors are simple but functional. A central hearth provides heat and light. Small storage pits hold grains and seeds, and platforms or mats serve as beds. These homes are not permanent monuments, but they are durable enough to last years with careful maintenance. The village layout reflects social organization. Homes cluster into family compounds or kin groups. Communal spaces exist for work, storytelling, and ritual. Paths between structures are worn, compacted over generations, showing the patterns of daily life. Boundaries are subtle yet understood: who occupies which plot, where children play, and which areas are reserved for specific communal tasks. Daily routines are shaped by survival. Corn, beans, and squash dominate subsistence agriculture, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and foraging. Children participate early, carrying water, guarding small plots, and observing elders. Women grind maize, prepare meals, repair pottery, and manage domestic resources. Men hunt, fish, clear fields, and construct houses. Labor is divided, but cooperation is constant. Fields lie just beyond the homes, often in small patches or long, narrow strips. Soil is carefully managed, manured, rotated, and weeded. Fertility is maintained through knowledge accumulated over generations. A poor harvest has immediate consequences, and success is rewarded with stability and, occasionally, surplus to share or trade. Storage is critical. Granaries or pits hold maize and other staples, often covered to protect against moisture and pests. Theft is rare but possible. Social enforcement and communal oversight maintain trust. Food is distributed according to family size, social expectations, and ritual obligations. Surplus may support craft specialists or feed travelers, linking villages into larger networks. Craft production is embedded in daily life. Pottery is made in homes or small communal workshops. Stone tools are sharpened and repaired. Shell and bone are crafted into beads, pendants, and utensils. Skills are learned through observation and repetition. Quality varies by experience and access to materials, but functionality is paramount. Ritual exists in parallel with work. Small shrines, ceremonial spaces, or offerings may exist within or near households. The spiritual world is integrated into everyday life. Prayers, seasonal observances, and protective charms accompany work, travel, and preparation of food. Participation is habitual, sometimes subtle, but essential for maintaining the social and spiritual balance that ensures survival. Life in these villages is not easy. Labor is relentless. Disease is common. Infant mortality is high. Winters are cold, summers hot and humid. Floods can wipe out fields and homes. Yet the people are resilient, adapting continuously to environmental challenges, social demands, and the rhythms of subsistence. Children learn more than practical skills; they absorb expectations, social hierarchies, and communal norms. By adolescence, they can contribute meaningfully to labor, ritual, and decision-making. Knowledge is passed quietly, generation by generation, through participation rather than formal instruction. From the perspective of an outsider, village life may seem mundane, repetitive, and dull. But these routines are the foundation of Mississippian civilization. Without reliable food production, craft specialization, and communal cooperation, larger centers like Cahokia or Moundville could not exist. Villagers sustain not only themselves but the broader social, economic, and ritual networks upon which society depends. And as you observe a small riverside settlement, children running between homes, smoke rising from dozens of hearths, and elders quietly tending maize or repairing tools, you might pause to reflect. How does daily, ordinary labor sustain extraordinary social and political structures? And what vulnerabilities emerge when the rhythms of life are disrupted by environment, disease, or human error? As you spend more time in a Mississippian village, the interconnectedness of labor, environment, and social structure becomes clear. Each household is a microcosm of the broader society. The work done here, planting, harvesting, crafting, maintaining dwellings, feeds into regional networks of food, goods, and ritual that extend far beyond the village. Agricultural life dominates the calendar. Spring is a season of preparation. Fields are cleared, soil turned, seeds sorted. Families work in coordinated groups, passing knowledge quietly to the next generation. Children accompany adults to fields, observing and helping. They learn timing, technique, and the subtle art of anticipating weather and pest patterns. These skills are not written or formally taught; they are lived. By summer, labor reaches its peak. Fields demand constant attention. Weeding, irrigation adjustments, and pest control occupy much of daylight. Villagers also harvest wild foods, hunt game, and fish rivers or oxbow lakes. Food security depends on careful attention and continuous effort. Mistakes carry consequences. A missed pest infestation or a late planting can compromise an entire household's survival for months. Craft production continues alongside agriculture. Pottery is shaped and fired for daily use and storage. Stone tools are maintained, repaired, or replaced. Shells, bones, and other materials are crafted into functional and decorative items. These objects are not luxury; they are essential to survival and social participation. A broken pot or dull tool can ripple across the household's labor, slowing work and increasing risk. Social organization is reinforced by these routines. Households rely on kinship networks for labor sharing, childcare, and resource distribution. Reciprocity is critical. Help today ensures support tomorrow. Failure to contribute can isolate a family, threatening both material survival and social standing. Social bonds are built and maintained quietly, almost invisibly, through repetition of everyday obligations. Ritual and spiritual practice permeate life. Small offerings, prayers, and observances accompany work and travel. Certain tasks, planting, harvesting, or storing maize, may be framed with ritual gestures or communal acknowledgement. These practices are subtle yet essential. They reinforce belief, social cohesion, and continuity. In essence, religion is woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than set aside as a separate domain. Seasonal cycles dictate movement and labor intensity. Late summer and early autumn are times of harvest and storage. Corn, beans, and squash are gathered and carefully dried. Surplus is stored in pits or raised granaries. Families coordinate with neighbors to prevent spoilage and loss. Trade may occur at this time, sending surplus to nearby towns or ceremonial centers. These actions connect isolated households to the broader Mississippian world. Environmental pressures are constant. Floods may destroy fields or homes, droughts reduce yields, disease strikes unpredictably. Villagers adapt, moving temporarily, relying on stored resources, or supplementing their diet with foraged foods. Survival depends not only on skill but on careful observation of natural rhythms and flexibility in response. Gender roles structure labor but are not rigidly separate. Women handle domestic management, food processing, and craft work. Men hunt, fish, and clear fields. Yet cooperation is continuous and tasks overlap when necessary. The household functions as a unit balancing labor with survival demands. Despite the challenges, life in the village is socially and culturally rich. Children learn songs, stories, and rituals. Community gatherings mark seasonal milestones. Knowledge is transmitted through participation, observation, and subtle correction. Over years, these routines ensure not just survival, but the continuity of Mississippian culture. By late autumn and winter, when the work in fields slows, households focus on maintenance, repairing dwellings, crafting tools, and preparing for the next planting season. Rituals tied to celestial events or seasonal cycles provide structure, marking time and reaffirming social bonds. These quieter months are vital. They reinforce preparation, knowledge transmission, and reflection on the year's successes and failures. And yet, even in this quiet persistence, tension lingers. Labor is heavy, resources are finite, and survival depends on careful coordination. Social obligations, ritual participation, and environmental unpredictability continually test households. Life is sustainable, but only through relentless attention and cooperation. As you watch villagers quietly moving through their daily routines, grinding maize, repairing roofs, exchanging small gifts, or tending children, you may pause to consider. How does the rhythm of ordinary life, repeated across generations, sustain not only survival but the broader social and ceremonial networks of a civilization? And what happens when even small disruptions threaten this delicate balance? As the years pass, the cycles of village life reveal the subtle yet profound resilience of Mississippian society. Villages along the floodplains are not centers of monumental power or ceremonial display, yet they form the essential scaffolding that supports urban hubs like Cahokia and Moundville. Their strength lies not in grand architecture or exotic trade, but in continuous, careful, and collaborative labor. By late winter, after months of work in fields, preparation for planting, and participation in small communal rituals, you begin to see how deeply intertwined survival, culture, and social cohesion truly are. Granaries are inspected, homes repaired, tools sharpened. Children, now skilled observers of labor, participate actively. Knowledge flows seamlessly from generation to generation. Each household functions almost as a self-contained node within a vast network of villages, yet each node also depends on others. Independence exists within interdependence. Environmental pressures, ever present, continue to shape behavior. Floods may force temporary relocation, droughts test storage systems, and the unpredictability of weather underscores how closely people must observe their surroundings. Villagers adapt in real time, adjusting planting techniques, harvesting schedules, and labor allocation. Survival is a negotiation with forces beyond their control, mediated through careful preparation and community cooperation. Trade and travel extend the village's influence beyond its immediate surroundings. Surplus is sent to nearby towns or ceremonial centers. Skilled artisans supply pottery, tools, or ornaments. Information about environmental patterns, ritual innovations, or social alliances travels along these networks. Though small, villages are active participants in broader Mississippian society, linking local survival to regional stability. Social cohesion is maintained not through coercion alone, but through a system of shared obligations and routine. Labor, ritual, and reciprocity reinforce one another, offering help, participating in communal labor or providing food during feasts establishes bonds of trust that are both practical and moral. A village that neglects these duties risks isolation, food insecurity, or social marginalization. Participation is both survival and social insurance. Yet vulnerability is constant. Illness, crop failure, or environmental disruption can destabilize a household and ripple outward. These vulnerabilities are magnified by social interdependence. The failure of one family to provide labor or resources affects neighbors, ceremonial obligations, and trade relationships. The delicate web that sustains Mississippian society relies on consistency, adaptability, and vigilance. Daily life also carries intangible rewards. Storytelling, small rituals, and domestic ceremonies anchor individuals to history, community, and cosmology. Children learn not only practical skills, but the moral and spiritual principles of their culture. Work is never purely physical. It is infused with meaning, belief, and continuity. Villages teach endurance, cooperation, and observation, shaping people capable of sustaining both household and society. By late spring, with new planting underway, the rhythm of life restarts. Lessons learned from prior seasons guide decisions. Houses and granaries built in winter support agricultural labor. Knowledge gained from observation, previous harvests, and trade inform strategy. Life is cyclical, demanding, and deeply human. And in this repetition, you recognize a profound truth about Mississippian society. Its longevity, influence, and resilience do not emerge from monumental achievements alone. They emerge from the quiet, persistent labor of ordinary people, men, women, and children whose daily actions ripple outward, sustaining both communities and entire civilizations. Standing at the edge of a floodplain village, observing smoke rising from hearths, children learning, and adults moving with purpose, you may pause to reflect. How does ordinary, persistent labor across generations sustain not only survival, but the social, ritual, and political systems of a civilization? And what happens when environmental, social, or human disruptions threaten the invisible threads holding it all together? Story 7. The rise of Cahokia, North America's largest Mississippian city. If you want to see the Mississippian world at its grandest, you travel to Cahokia. Situated near modern-day St. Louis, at the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, this city reaches heights of scale and organization unmatched anywhere else in pre-Columbian North America. It is a city of mounds, plazas, and discipline, labor a center where agricultural surplus, trade, and ritual converge to produce unprecedented social complexity. The city spreads across flat floodplains, a patchwork of homes, fields, and monumental architecture. The most striking feature is Monk's Mound, a massive earthen pyramid standing over 100 feet tall, covering 14 acres at its base. Its terraces are layered with soil from surrounding borrow pits, compacted carefully over decades. The mound is not simply an elevated platform, it is a statement of power, labor, and collective effort. Around the central plaza, smaller mounds rise in geometric arrangement, forming ceremonial and elite precincts. These mounds house leaders, ritual specialists, and important gatherings, while the plaza itself serves as a public stage for feasts, games, and displays of authority. Every structure, every path, every elevation communicates hierarchy and organization. Daily life in Cahokia is an intricate balance of labor, ritual, and subsistence. Thousands of residents cultivate maize, beans, and squash on nearby fields. Women grind maize on stone metates, process food, and maintain households. Men clear land, hunt, fish, and construct buildings. Children participate early, carrying small baskets, observing labor, and rehearsing ritual behaviors. The city's survival depends on this relentless, coordinated activity. Trade fuels the city's growth. Goods flow in from distant regions: marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians. These materials are not merely decorative, they confer status and ritual significance. Leaders control distribution, hosting feasts and ceremonies that reinforce authority and social cohesion. Even ordinary households are connected to these networks through obligations and participation. Ritual is woven into every aspect of life. Seasonal ceremonies, feasts, and astronomical observances regulate time and reinforce hierarchy. Leaders perform visible roles, directing the movement of goods, labor, and people. Participation in these rituals demonstrates obedience, loyalty, and social identity. Refusal or absence carries social consequences. In this way, belief and authority are inseparable. Cahokia's scale necessitates organization. Labor is divided and coordinated across households and kin networks. Communal projects from mound construction to public works require careful planning. Food must be produced, stored, and redistributed to sustain population density and ceremonial obligations. Craft specialization emerges. Pottery, stone tools, shell beads, and textiles are produced by skilled artisans whose work supports both survival and status. Environmental management is crucial. Floodplains are fertile but unpredictable. Settlers understand the patterns of the Mississippi and its tributaries, adjusting planting schedules, building drainage, and monitoring soil fertility. Failure to manage the land could result in food shortages or structural damage to mounds and homes. Cahokia also embodies social tension. Hierarchies are visually and spatially reinforced, creating clear distinctions between elite and commoner. Labor demands are relentless. Surplus is necessary to sustain ceremonial activity and population density. Social cohesion relies on participation, but dependence creates vulnerability. When coordination falters or environmental conditions worsen, the city becomes exposed. Children grow up immersed in this complex world. From an early age, they observe social cues, ritual expectations, and labor responsibilities. By adolescence, many can participate in both routine labor and ceremonial activities, ensuring continuity of the social system. Yet even in its grandiosity, Cahokia's future is never guaranteed. The city's scale, while impressive, magnifies its reliance on labor, agricultural surplus, trade, and belief systems. Success is visible in monumental mounds and bustling plazas, but failure is equally tangible. Crop failure, disease, or social disruption could have cascading effects across the city. As you stand on the plaza at sunrise, watching smoke rise from hundreds of dwellings and laborers move toward fields, construction sites, and ceremonial spaces, you may pause to consider: how does a city of tens of thousands thrive on coordinated labor, belief, and environmental management? And what vulnerabilities emerge when any one of these pillars falters in a society so dependent on both people and nature? As you spend more time in Cahokia, the complexity of life becomes impossible to ignore. It is not just a city. It is a network of interdependent households, fields, artisans, and ceremonial specialists, all coordinated to sustain monumental architecture, social hierarchy, and ritual life. The city hums with purpose, and every activity, whether grinding maize, hauling earth, or performing a dance, is part of an intricate social machine. Monk's Mound dominates the landscape, its massive terraces rising above the floodplain. Building it required thousands of laborers over decades, moving soil in baskets, tamping layers carefully to prevent collapse. Work continued through seasons, with men, women, and children contributing in proportion to household size and ability. Each layer of earth is a testament to both collective effort and social organization. Construction itself is ritualized. The act of raising the mound is as much about demonstrating loyalty and coordination as it is about creating a physical platform. Around Monk's Mound, smaller mounds mark residential and ceremonial spaces for the elite. These leaders oversee both labor and ritual, controlling the flow of goods, knowledge, and prestige. Their residences are larger, more elaborate, and strategically positioned to reinforce visibility and authority. From these platforms, they direct feasts, ceremonies, and the redistribution of food and exotic items. Copper plates, shell gorgets, mica ornaments. Every action demonstrates power and reinforces obligations among the common populace. The central plaza is a stage for civic life. It hosts dances, games, seasonal ceremonies, and public feasts. Participation is mandatory, or at least socially expected. These events are carefully choreographed, with seating, procession order, and distribution of food and ritual objects determined by hierarchy. Observation of these events teaches younger members of society about social norms, obligations, and their place within the civic structure. Even small gestures: who eats first, who carries offerings, who dances in a particular position, carry profound social meaning. Agriculture remains the backbone of this urban life. Surrounding fields produce maize, beans, and squash, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and foraging. Labor must be coordinated precisely to ensure that harvests sustain both population density and ceremonial obligations. Seasonal shortages magnify tension. Any disruption in labor or crop production can ripple through the city, affecting food distribution, ritual schedules, and social cohesion. Villagers and urban residents alike understand the fragility of abundance. Craft specialization is integral. Artisans produce pottery, stone tools, shell beads, copper ornaments, and textiles. These objects are both functional and symbolic, sustaining daily life while reinforcing hierarchy. Skilled work ensures survival, status, and participation in ritual. Those who cannot meet these expectations risk social marginalization. The city's complexity depends on expertise and labor spread across multiple households and neighborhoods. Trade connects Cahokia to distant regions. Marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, and mica from the Appalachians arrive through river networks. These exotic goods are woven into ceremonial life, reinforcing the prestige of leaders and cementing alliances across vast distances. The movement of these goods also requires organization. Skilled paddlers, navigators, and negotiators maintain networks essential to the city's prominence. Even daily observation reveals subtle tensions. Labor demands are relentless. Households must balance field work, craft production, and participation in ritual. Social obligations are heavy. Failure to contribute can undermine reputation or influence. Environmental unpredictability: floods, droughts, or disease creates constant uncertainty. Authority is maintained through continuous demonstration of competence, generosity, and ritual correctness. A single season of failure could weaken leaders' legitimacy. Children grow up immersed in these systems, learning not only practical skills but also hierarchy, ritual, and civic participation. By adolescence, they can participate fully in ceremonies, contribute to labor, and observe leadership in action. Continuity depends on their education, both explicit and tacit, as knowledge is passed quietly through participation rather than formal instruction. And yet, for all its grandeur, Cahokia's immense scale carries inherent vulnerability. Its dependence on intensive labor, agricultural surplus, trade, and ritualized authority means that even minor disruptions: a failed harvest, environmental change, or social conflict could cascade across the city. Monumental architecture and sophisticated social organization amplify both power and risk. Standing atop a small mound at the edge of the central plaza, observing laborers moving through the city, artisans at work, and elders preparing for ritual, you might ask, how can a city this large maintain cohesion, productivity, and social order when its very size amplifies the fragility of labor, trade, and ritual networks? And what happens when the system that supports life on this scale begins to strain under its own weight? As you linger in Cahokia through years of seasonal cycles, the full magnitude of the city's achievements and its vulnerabilities becomes clear. Monk's Mound towers above the floodplain, an enduring symbol of labor, organization, and belief. Around it, plazas, smaller mounds, and residential compounds form a city that may have housed tens of thousands. Its scale is unprecedented, its order meticulously maintained, yet the very forces that sustain it also test its resilience. The city's daily life is an intricate balancing act. Agriculture produces the food needed to feed a dense population and support ceremonial feasts. Artisans maintain tools, craft goods, and prepare ceremonial objects. Laborers construct and maintain mounds and dwellings. Leaders orchestrate ceremonies, manage surplus, and regulate trade. Participation is continuous, expectations are high, and the cost of failure is tangible. Missed labor, delayed ritual, or failed harvest reverberates across households and neighborhoods. Trade flows constantly, linking Cahokia to distant regions. Marine shells, copper, mica, and other exotic items reinforce status and authority. The arrival and distribution of these goods are carefully managed. Leaders leverage them to consolidate power and maintain social cohesion. Yet dependence on external networks introduces fragility. River routes shift, droughts reduce surplus, or political tensions elsewhere can interrupt supplies. Cahokia thrives as long as these flows continue, but disruption magnifies risk. Ritual underpins authority. Seasonal feasts, dances, and ceremonies reinforce hierarchy and communal identity. Participation is expected, and obedience is observed. Success in ritual strengthens leaders, failure undermines them. Children learn these systems by observation, embedding social norms and responsibilities into daily experience. Continuity depends on cultural memory, labor, and belief, an interwoven system as delicate as it is vast. Despite its sophistication, the city is vulnerable to multiple pressures. Environmental shifts, floods, droughts, or soil depletion strain agriculture. Disease can spread rapidly through dense neighborhoods. Social tensions, generated by labor demands, inequalities, and scarcity, can erode cohesion. Even the monumental mounds that symbolize power are at the mercy of labor and maintenance. Erosion, neglect, or improper construction threatens both physical and symbolic stability. By the 13th and 14th centuries, signs of stress begin to appear. Peripheral neighborhoods shrink, some mounds receive less attention, and participation in central ceremonies declines. Trade networks fluctuate, and population density strains local resources. Leadership adapts, but the city's scale amplifies every challenge. Cahokia's strength, its size, coordination, and influence also magnifies its fragility. And yet the city's legacy is profound. Monumental architecture, organized labor, craft specialization, agricultural innovation, and complex social hierarchies influence Mississippian societies across the region for centuries. Even after decline, Cahokia remains a reference point, shaping urban planning, ritual practice, and social organization in smaller centers that emerge later. Standing atop Monk's Mound, you can see the interplay of environment, labor, ritual, and hierarchy across the floodplain. Smoke rises from thousands of hearths, laborers move purposefully across fields and plazas, and ritual spaces continue to pulse with life. Every action, no matter how ordinary, contributes to the survival and influence of the city. And in this observation, you are left with a lingering question that transcends time. How does a civilization maintain order, productivity, and identity at unprecedented scale? And what lessons does the rise and eventual decline of Cahokia offer about the balance between human ambition, labor, and the unpredictable forces of nature? Story 8. Women of the Mississippian World: Labor, Family, and Influence. In the shadow of monumental mounds and sprawling cities like Cahokia and Moundville, the lives of women sustained the entire Mississippian world. Their labor, knowledge, and social influence were invisible to outsiders, yet indispensable. Without them, the urban centers, trade networks, and ceremonial hierarchies that defined the civilization could not exist. You step into a riverside household, simple but carefully maintained. Women move with purpose. They grind maize on stone metates, carefully winnow kernels, and prepare food for storage or daily consumption. Cooking is labor-intensive, roasting, boiling, and drying foods to last through weeks or months. Every meal requires knowledge of timing, technique, and preservation. Mistakes could mean spoilage or hunger. Survival depends on their skill. Women also manage domestic production. Pottery, cordage, and textiles occupy much of their time. Clay is gathered, cleaned, and prepared, often with intricate care to achieve the desired consistency and durability. Pots are shaped, decorated, and fired, fulfilling both practical and ritual functions. Cordage and textiles woven or twisted from plant fibers support household needs and ceremonial life. These crafts are as essential as fields or rivers. Childcare and education are integrated with labor. Girls learn through observation, repetition, and participation. From an early age, they grind maize, shape clay, and manage small aspects of household organization. Boys participate as well, but girls absorb both domestic and ritual knowledge that ensures continuity of social structures. Skills, norms, and obligations are transmitted quietly yet comprehensively. Women participate in ritual as much as men, though often in different roles. Household shrines, offerings, and seasonal observances fall under their care. They prepare food and objects for ceremonies, manage water for ritual cleansing, and sometimes lead prayers or chants within the household. Their spiritual labor parallels physical labor, both sustain the social, environmental, and religious framework of Mississippian society. Social influence extends beyond the household. Women organize labor groups for planting, harvesting, and craft production. They coordinate communal efforts during feasts, ceremonies, or mound construction. Their knowledge of resources, schedules, and social obligations positions them as central figures in local decision-making. Authority is subtle, relational, and persistent. Trade is another sphere where women's roles are critical. They prepare surplus food, craft goods, and woven or beaded items for exchange. Through participation in trade, they sustain networks that link villages, ceremonial centers, and distant regions. Even when absent from political hierarchies, women wield influence through the movement of goods, knowledge, and ritual participation. Health and family care are vital. Women tend the sick, manage childbirth, and ensure food security during lean seasons. Their work is physically demanding and continuous. Malnutrition, disease, or environmental stress directly impacts their ability to sustain household and community life, yet their resilience shapes the survival of the broader society. Despite being essential, women's labor often goes unrecognized by historical accounts focused on mounds, trade, and warfare. Yet without it, the monumental achievements of Mississippian civilization, urban centers, ceremonial hubs, and complex social hierarchies would be impossible. Their contribution is both foundational and ongoing. Children growing up in these households internalize expectations, skills, and knowledge. Girls inherit practical and spiritual expertise. Boys learn cooperation, observation, and the rhythms of domestic and ritual life. The next generation is prepared to participate fully in labor, ritual, and social obligations, ensuring continuity of culture and survival. As you watch women orchestrating the rhythms of daily life, grinding maize, tending children, shaping pottery, preparing ritual offerings, you begin to understand that the heartbeat of the Mississippian world is quieter than monumental mounds or bustling plazas. It is found here, in the careful, constant labor that sustains homes, families, and communities. And as you reflect on the hidden yet indispensable influence of women, you might quietly ask yourself, how does a civilization rely on labor and knowledge that is largely invisible to outsiders? And what happens when the structures of power, ritual, and daily survival depend on contributions that are both essential and often unacknowledged? Spending more time in Mississippian villages and urban centers, the scope of women's influence becomes clearer. Their labor is never isolated, it is the thread connecting households, communities, and entire regions. Every action, whether domestic, ritual, or economic, feeds into larger social, political, and ceremonial structures. Agriculture is one sphere where women's role is critical. While men may clear fields or hunt, women manage planting schedules, weeding, and crop maintenance in many areas. They carefully monitor the health of maize, beans, and squash, adjusting techniques to prevent pests or maximize yield. Their intimate knowledge of plant cycles and soil conditions is essential to ensure surplus, which in turn sustains urban populations and ceremonial centers. Craft specialization intertwines with ritual life. Women produce pottery, textiles, and ornaments used both in everyday life and ceremonial contexts. Clay pots store grain, serve food, and are included as grave goods, signaling family status and ritual understanding. Shell and stone beads, woven mats, and cloth serve similar functions. Skilled work demonstrates expertise, contributes to social standing, and supports leaders who rely on these crafted items to sustain ritual authority. Childcare, education, and socialization are integrated seamlessly into women's daily labor. Girls observe, participate, and gradually take on responsibilities, learning both practical skills and social norms. Boys also learn cooperation, resource management, and the subtleties of ritual participation. Through repetition and participation, children internalize the rules and rhythms that maintain cohesion across households and communities. Women also manage household economies. They organize food storage, prepare surplus for trade, and coordinate labor among kin networks. These activities extend their influence beyond domestic spaces into local markets, ceremonial centers, and regional trade networks. By regulating resources, they maintain both survival and social stability, quietly shaping political and economic outcomes without holding formal office. Ritual labor reinforces social cohesion. Women prepare offerings, maintain household shrines, and participate in ceremonial preparations. These practices are often invisible to outsiders, yet they sustain both spiritual and social systems. Rituals reinforce hierarchy, establish connections between households and leaders, and integrate daily labor into a cosmological framework. Women's participation ensures that sacred and practical life are inseparable. Health, medicine, and caregiving amplify their influence. Women tend the sick, manage birthing processes, and maintain nutrition for families and laborers. Knowledge of medicinal plants, healing practices, and household management passes from generation to generation. This expertise supports population stability and resilience, creating conditions for both survival and social continuity. Even in the face of environmental challenges, floods, droughts, or crop failure, women adapt. They coordinate labor, adjust food preparation, and manage resources strategically. Their foresight and flexibility cushion households and communities against disruption. Without this adaptive labor, the consequences of environmental variability would be catastrophic. Yet their work is largely invisible in the archaeological record. While mounds, plazas, and exotic trade goods capture attention, the continuous labor of food preparation, craft, and social reproduction remains unmarked. Yet these invisible contributions form the foundation on which monumental achievements, trade networks, and ceremonial hierarchies rest. As seasons pass, the integration of labor, ritual, and social responsibility becomes evident. Women's work ensures that households function, that surplus is available for urban centers, and that rituals occur as prescribed. Their influence extends through kin networks, trade routes, and ceremonial obligations, linking the everyday to the extraordinary. Watching women manage the rhythms of life, you recognize a subtle truth. Mississippian civilization is built not only on monumental architecture or elite authority, but on the careful, constant work of those who remain largely unseen. Their labor sustains the social, spiritual, and economic networks that define the culture. And in this realization, a question emerges, quiet but profound. How does the unseen, persistent labor of women shape the survival and continuity of a civilization? and what risks arise when the foundations of daily life are threatened by scarcity, environmental pressures, or social upheaval. Over years of observation, the full impact of women's labor becomes undeniable. From household management to ritual participation, from food preparation to craft production, women sustain the physical, social, and spiritual life of Mississippian communities. Their work quietly underpins monumental centers, regional trade networks, and ceremonial hierarchies alike. In daily routines, women balance multiple responsibilities. They grind maize, tend gardens, and oversee household maintenance while simultaneously preparing ritual offerings, caring for children, and producing crafted goods for trade. Each activity is deliberate, learned through practice, and reinforced through repetition. The rhythm of their labor ensures not only survival, but the continuation of social norms, hierarchy, and cosmology. Through craft production, women influence both domestic and ceremonial spheres. Pottery, textiles, and ornaments are not merely functional, they convey identity, status, and spiritual meaning. When a finely crafted shell gorget appears at a feast or burial, it reflects both the artisan's skill and the household's social connections. Such objects circulate across households, villages, and ceremonial centers, embedding women's labor into broader cultural networks. Education and socialization are equally significant. Girls grow up observing household management, ritual practice, and resource coordination. Boys learn cooperation, labor expectations, and respect for social hierarchy. Knowledge is transmitted through observation, instruction, and active participation. In this way, women shape the next generation's understanding of work, ritual, and social obligation, ensuring continuity of culture. Women's labor also extends into trade and surplus management. By preparing food, crafting goods, and coordinating household participation in trade or feasts, they connect villages to urban centers and distant networks. Their careful management of resources sustains both economic and ceremonial activity. Leadership, mounds, and feasts cannot function without this invisible infrastructure. Health and caregiving amplify their influence further. Women monitor nutrition, manage illness, and assist in childbirth. Their knowledge of medicinal plants, household remedies, and preventative practices supports the resilience of the population. Without these contributions, survival rates would decline, labor output would suffer, and social stability would weaken. Even under environmental stress, floods, droughts, or crop failure, women adapt. They ration food, adjust labor schedules, and redistribute resources. Their foresight and flexibility are essential to the resilience of households and communities. While leadership, trade, and monumental architecture are highly visible, it is women's continuous, adaptive labor that enables survival in unpredictable conditions. Yet the work of women is often invisible to historical narratives that focus on mounds, trade, and political hierarchy. Without acknowledging these contributions, one might misinterpret Mississippian society as dependent solely on monumental architecture or elite leadership. In truth, women are the unseen backbone, linking daily life to ceremonial, economic, and social structures. Standing in a modest riverside dwelling, observing women coordinating multiple layers of household, ritual, and craft labor, you grasp the scale of their impact. They do not occupy the largest mounds, but their work sustains the labor, food supply, and cultural practices that allow those mounds to exist. Their influence ripples outward, quietly sustaining entire communities and regional networks. And as you reflect on the invisible yet indispensable contributions of women, a final thought emerges. How can the survival, cohesion, and cultural continuity of a civilization depend on labor that is largely unseen? And what lessons does this offer about the ways history is remembered or overlooked through the lens of monumental achievements?